The racing game. The only legal way to be a bad driver. A genre for people who like cars, racing cars, crashing cars.
This is the scene.
You get the idea. There was no better place to partake in virtual motorsports back in the day than the arcade. It's a genre that stood the test of time and perseveres to this very day. While I never had much personal experience with today's game, it's an important step in the progression of the larger industry, on top of just being a really fun game. Daytona USA was released in 1994, published and developed by Sega. You can't talk too much about Sega in the 90s without bringing up their ventures in the arcade, and no development team is more important to not just arcades, but video games at large than Sega Amusement Division No. 2, or simply AM2. Led by designer Yu Suzuki, best known at the time for working on Sega Superscalar arcade titles like the Hang-On games, Space Harrier, and Outrun, as well as being the insane madman responsible for Shenmue, a game for another time. AM2 had been at the forefront of achieving some graphically and technically impressive games under Suzuki's stewardship. That penchant for pushing video games into the next dimension literally continued when in 1992, Virtua Racing was released. The first game to use the Model 1 arcade board, and one of the earliest games to use 3D polygonal graphics. 2 years later saw the introduction of the Model 2, with Daytona USA, like Virtua Racing, being the public's introduction to the new technology.
A new winner.
But what about Daytona makes it so unique? How can a simple racing game be called one of the best of all time? Well, we have to keep in mind what the typical game looked like at the time. The sprites are the name of the game, with graphical techniques such as Mode 7 on the Super Nintendo being used to create a pseudo 3D appearance. Polygonal 3D, while technically possible on home consoles, was still a far cry from what it would be, and what was possible in the arcades. The Model 2, in comparison to the Model 1, brought in texture-mapped 3D models on top of texture filtering and anti-aliasing, which is technical jargon for the in-game models aren't just flat textures. They're textures that have smooth pictures on them. You know, it's interesting to look at older titles and see the evolution of the medium, and you'd surprise yourself with where innovation can come from. It could be from a genre you don't spend too much time in, such as racing.
Please select a race course.
Gameplay-wise, you've got 3 courses: beginner, advanced, and expert, each one more difficult than the last. And I'm going to take a moment here to say that holy shit am I bad at this game. My experience with racing games growing up was Mario Kart and the Cars video game. Oh, and the car racing minigame and Ty the Tasmanian Tiger 2. AM2 wasn't setting out to make a car racing sim, though I know that those have fans of Gran Turismo and Forza or anything to go by. Instead, AM2 decided to add drifting to the game, something that you're apparently not supposed to do with stock cars. It takes a bit to get the hang of, if I'm being honest. I don't dare try to drift on automatic transmission, and even with manual transmission, it's still a bit of a challenge to come out of a drift without slamming into the wall. But with practice, it can be done. Only occasionally, if you're me.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
The beginner's course, or 3.7 Speedway, begins with a rolling start. You know, AM2 actually visited Daytona International Speedway for reference, and was even going to put it in the actual game. But the design of the track was deemed to be too repetitive by the game's director and future creator of the Yakuza series, Toshihiro Nagoshi. Though 3.7 does use a similar track design to Daytona International, in an effort to make it more video gamey, they added a sharp left turn just before the finish line, necessitating the use of the drift, lest the Hornet go catapulting into the stratosphere. Advanced, or Dinosaur Canyon, contains a bevy more drifting compared to 3.7. It boasts the lowest racer count in the game at 20, and features the racer starting from a standstill, not a rolling start. It has a drifting turn towards the starting line just like 3.7, but it's a bit longer, and more than a pain than the one from 3.7. The turns just after the tunnel as well as the aforementioned drift into the home stretch are my hang-ups, but after some practice runs I was able to get the hang of things. That's the thing with these sorts of games. Repetition builds muscle memory, allowing you to better improve your time and your standing in future races. But what takes the cake in terms of difficulty is the expert track, Seaside Street Galaxy. A 2-lap gauntlet set the Takenobu Mitsuyoshi Sugary Sweet sky high. I suppose while I have footage of me eating shit on the track, I can talk about the soundtrack. Daytona USA is most known for its soundtrack, composed by Takenobu Mitsuyoshi, which also include his vocals. Interestingly, the vocals in the original arcade soundtrack had to be cut up and placed like notes. You can hear how they stop suddenly when the next syllable starts. I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that Seaside Street is my least favorite track in the game. Of course, most of it comes down to me being shit at the game and the overall difficulty of the track itself. But even then, in a track I despise, there are some things I like about it. The giant statue of Jeffrey from Virtua Fighter, the horses galloping in the grass and the seagulls flying, the shameless plugging of the Model 2 on the wall. It's a sort of oddly timeless quality to the game's visuals that make it appealing that I just can't put my finger on. Maybe because we're so inundated with games trying to look the most realistic that something that we would now call antiquated stands out. Possibly the case. Suffice to say, Daytona USA was highly successful on release, so naturally it got a few ports over the years. The first of which was on the Sega Saturn, which is noteworthy for having an arranged soundtrack, which means Mitsuyoshi's vocals aren't just notes on the Model 2 sound chip, as well as having a piss-poor draw distance on top of the graphics being a noticeable downgrade, which, yeah, it's early Saturn, I'm not really surprised all that much. There was a second version of Daytona on the Saturn, the Championship Circuit Edition, which boasts 2 new stages, new graphics on top of remixing the soundtrack. Blasphemous, I know. And that version got a Netlink version so you can play against your friends and other people. If they had a Saturn, a Netlink, a phone cable, and a copy of Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition, Netlink Edition. There's also the port I'm using to record the game, the HD version on the Xbox 360 and PS3. However, that's been delisted for a few years. You know, you would think with a series as iconic as Daytona USA that the International Speedway Corporation would give Sega some leeway, but I guess not. Or maybe Sega pulled a Sega. I wouldn't be too surprised. There's currently recompilation efforts being made using the RexGlue recomp tool, but that requires building the whole thing yourself at the moment, so frankly I'd stay clear of that for the time being. Daytona USA, like all arcade racers, can be tough to learn, and even then once you've got the hang of things, it can still cause you to slam headfirst into a wall or spin out of control out of a turn. But Takenobu Mitsuyoshi's stellar music and the beautiful visuals make Daytona USA an absolute must-play. However you play it, of course. Just don't eat shit on the track.